Lviv, and it's about language and urban space and what we can tell about society, politics, language change when we actually pay attention to language that we usually ignore in urban spaces. So when I would ask people what Lviv looked like during the Soviet period, they would talk about it being gray. They would talk about how little writing there was. So there's one slogan about the October Revolution and one cafe sign, and here I'll draw your attention to a mosaic right there. So if you look at that same intersection right in the middle of Lviv in 2008, you're going to see something really different. You see that you have a bank slogan at the top, you have ads for different cell phone providers, you have a series of billboards replacing the mosaic. So public space has been totally commercialized and really altered during this period. And yet people still don't really pay attention to that as language. They tend to talk about it as clutter. So if you're at street level, you can really notice not just how much there is hitting you, but how it's in different languages, different alphabets. The sizes of the signs are different. The fonts are all different. It's like this visual assault, all formed out of language. Now the question is this just something new? If we go back to the pre-Soviet period, you can see that having that kind of lots of writing associated with commercial spaces was something that was really common during the pre-Soviet Polish period in Lviv. And one of the ways that we can tell that this was not an isolated phenomenon is that in recent years, in the process of restoring buildings, there have been a lot of these kinds of facades revealed, where you see old stores advertising what they sold. So this is a milk store, like a dairy store, and they're multilingual. This one's in Polish and German, sometimes they're in Yiddish. There'll often be multiple languages. Now in 2012, what you have is a high-end chocolate company using that to hark back to a pre-Soviet romanticized Polish past. And so they've done the same thing where they write the wares that they sell on the outside of their building. And here's a guy texting, language and public space. So this is an example of a Soviet sign probably from the 1940s, and this clung on until the late 2000s. It's a cooperative that sold honey, and it has a very classic spare look to it that's, has just a single name on it. There's not a lot of visual clutter here. And that's going to be very typical of surviving Soviet signs. Here's another one. It's actually embedded right into the structure of this. This is bars were usually in basement spaces, so this is a bar called Evening Lviv. And you can see there's a much more visually cluttered sign up there, but previously it would have just been that sign that was part of the space itself that people would have gone by. This is an example that people gave to me of a Soviet-era sign that was unusual. So most of them were very limited in their artistic scope. This is a nice wrought iron sign. It's for a cafe, and it was cited as an example of something where the Soviets eased up a little bit of artistic control and allowed cafes and other spaces to have that. That's in contrast to this, which is a bookstore, very inviting, right? And what it says up here is books. So there's no name of the store or anything. It's very, and you can see the color of the store sign, which is brass, almost blends right in with the wood of the thing. So you'd have to know to look for it as you were walking by. This is much more typical of the late 60s, early 70s. You can see this font, this sign shape. I bet this sign was shipped all over the Soviet Union. And the fact that this sign was still here in the late 2000s tells you something about the fact that you're going to have these layered spaces with these evocative Soviet memories along with very new commercialized spaces. I have pictures of this very building, the House of Books, which was the main bookstore. I have pictures of this going back to the 1970s. It was still here in the late 2000s. And again, books, right? Well, if you look at a much more recent type of bookstore, what you have now is you have letter, book, supermarket. Okay, so you have not only the introduction of a name, but the addition of new vocabulary, like supermarket. Lots of different signs, much more color and visual clutter associated with commercial spaces now. I love this. This is an example of people remaking spaces. This is a kiosk where they've put up snack packets. This is my favorite. It's a combination of English and Ukrainian. Birka. It's a dried fish snack you eat while drinking beer. Okay? But it's really and color to the urban space. So I love it, and this is one of my favorite photographs. I love all the colors involved here and the fact that this is something almost like an unintentional collage that people made. But what does this say? It says, every Saturday we buy hair. Okay, so there are these flyers up all over the city that says, ladies, we buy hair. You know, come on Saturday and we'll buy your hair. This is another example of, you know, when the government steps back, they're not providing things like street signs. People spray paint their street number right on the side of the building. So it's language in public space that tells you something about politics and the financial state of the city at this moment. Here's another example. This is a large international company that has chosen, instead of a billboard or something else, it's telling you get off at the next exit if you want to go to Foxmart in English. And then they've got a nice little mural of a guy on a motorcycle to tell you something about what they sell. So again, this is kind of taking that public piece of graffiti and turning it into something commercial. Now this is real graffiti. It's one of my favorite pieces. All it says is Zria, which means, was it in vain? And it's in reference to the October Revolution, which you can only tell because it's spray painted in, it's a reference to the Orange Revolution. And you can only tell that because it's spray painted in orange. And this was 4 years after, and people disillusioned with something in with that. Now, you might think that this is about, I thought this slide was about crumbling urban spaces at the periphery of the city. But here, you can actually see that it's about emerging bilingualism. Someone has spray painted loch and then provided a helpful English translation right next to it. Loser.